Happy Thursday. Just letting everyone in. We'll start in just a couple clicks of the clock. All right, I think we'll get going now. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back. This is the third day of UC-GIS week. I'm really excited to be here, especially for today's sessions. My name is Scott Gruber, and I work at the UCLA Institute of the Environment and Sustainability. I'll be helping today to be a moderator. We have 6 talks today. Each one is going to be about 5 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat during the sessions. And I'm going to go ahead and start. So our first lightning talk on environmental science is from Catherine Brenner from UCLA. She's going to be discussing mapping 2018 wildfires using Bluesky framework and QGIS. Catherine, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go screen share my slides. Can everybody see? Okay,
that looks great.
So the research I've been working on is mapping air pollution from 2018 wildfires in California. And this is part of a UC multi-campus research program and initiative. I am a UCLA undergrad and currently doing research in the Environmental Health Sciences department. So you may be wondering, why did we focus on 2018 fire season? Well, when we first started the project, 2020 had not occurred yet. So 2020 saw a great increase in areas burned as well as fire emissions. But before then, 2018 was one of the biggest fire seasons. So you can see from looking at the graph, from 2017 to 2018, there was over 100% increase in the acres burned. We also saw a lot of other health implications with this, and how a lot of 100 confirmed fatalities and over 22,000 structures were burned. We also had over 6,000 fire events. So first, I want to talk a little bit about how wildfire significantly contributes to air pollution. So wildfires release large amounts of soot, ash, and carbon dioxide, and PM 2.5, one of the main sources of pollution that I'll be focusing on, is formed when tiny soot particles stick together. And this can cause a number of respiratory health issues, pictured in the chart here. So now to talk a little bit about my project. The overall goal of my project was to quantify the contribution of large wildfire events in 2018 to PM 2.5 pollution concentrations. The ways we did this was by estimating fire emissions from the largest single fire events in 2018. We used atmospheric transport models to map the pollution. And then we used QGIS and Bluesky modeling framework to map exposed populations across California. So I mentioned before that one of the biggest wildfires was the Camp Fire. So here we used Bluesky modeling framework, which takes in basic fire information such as location, date of burn, and the acres of the fire. And it gives us air pollution estimations. Here is an example of the output on the right here. So one of the individual fires that I examined was the Camp Fire. This picture right here shows the average 24-hour PM 2.5 concentration for the Camp Fire. And this is just one single day of the Camp Fire with the highest PM 2.5 concentration. So I ran this in zonal statistics, and one of the highest counties was Butte County here that had 36.97 micrograms per cubic meter. The EPA threshold for PM 2.5 is 35 micrograms per cubic meters. So this is already exceeding the EPA threshold. And this map does not take into account other sources of PM 2.5 emissions, such as automobile emissions, and even other fire events that may be occurring on the same day. So this really shows how big of a source of pollution that wildfires are. So the next steps for my research is to potentially map the 2020 fire season. Just to wrap up, the Camp Fire is one of the largest 2018 wildfires examples. But of course, there was over 6,000 fire events, so wildfires occurred across the state of California. And this resulted in a significant contribution to air pollution. I used Bluesky modeling framework and QGIS to create maps that are really helpful to map exposed populations. Thank you for joining. Here's my contact information. I'd like to also give a shout out to UC Merced, our collaborators on this project, and my faculty advisor, Dr. Miriam Marlier, for her help. I'll take questions at the end. Thank you.
Apologize. I always wind up muting myself on Zoom sessions. It was really good. Thank you. I'm looking forward to the Q&A and find out a little bit more about your work. Our next talk is from Nicholas Barth, who's at UC Riverside. He's going to be discussing current advances and future potential of digital mapping. Welcome, Nicholas.
Let me show my screen. Hi, everybody. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this talk is not so much a research talk as a appeal for taking GIS in the field. And so this will have a very geological slant to it, but is appropriate for any field discipline that collects data in the field. And so for hardware, we use at UCR, we use a iPad mini that has a ruggedized case. We have a class set of about 20 of these that we're able to issue to students for field courses in our department. So that's the hardware side of things. On the software side of things, there's lots of different competing options. These are three that I wanted to highlight. FieldMove is a really interesting map-centric one with a geology focus. And its advantage is that it's an all-in-one system where you can take georeferenced photos and then sketch on top of them. You can also use the internal measurements for the iPads and use those to take structural measurements, which are very helpful for geologists. This one's developed by a relatively small private company, and so this highlights the question of future support. It hasn't been updated in about a year, and so that's always a concern when you invest in a software platform. I'll also highlight ArcGIS Collector, which is a bit more metadata centric. Its advantage is definitely that it's very collaborative, but does require more setup. And then just very brief highlight of this new Strabo Spot, which is kind of a newcomer. It's more geology focused. But where this really stands out is that it's an open source software. At the moment, it's not very intuitive, but there's a lot of potential, given that it's open source, for it to be expanded and improved upon. And so just 2 weeks ago, ArcGIS, or Esri, announced that they were going to replace Collector and their other field apps with one unified Field Maps app. And so again, just highlighting the changing software space and concerns about being too invested in one software. So this is a screen grab on an iPad mini of some of the data that I've collected for a particular field area. So you can see, obviously, you can collect a huge amount of data compared to a paper map. This is way more than I can fit on a paper map. So there's photos, there's measurements, and metadata notes, as well as line work. So this is line work showing an example of some of the mapping where those will the different colors are different units and faults. This is just another example of some of the mapping. And then this has also been really useful for students. or for teaching, where this is an example of crowdsourcing, where over the course of about 2 days, students are able to map about a mile square area. This is all the data collected together, so we're able to pool over 500 different measurements, and they're able to cover a lot more ground by splitting in different directions. This is example 1 student's mapping. This is overlaying 2 students' mapping, and so one thing I really like about this as an instructor is I can very objectively overlay different students' maps in Google Earth and very carefully sort them from best to worst based on their accuracy and detail. This is an example of all the students in this particular course overlaid together, and just highlighting that there's about plus or minus 6 meter accuracy when you kind of pool all the student measurements together. I was involved in the disaster response for the 2019 Ridgecrest earthquakes that was coordinated by the California Geological Survey. They used ArcGIS, and this involved a lot of preloaded maps, including existing faults, aerial photos, and then they also had to set up a pre-existing form to decide how to collect metadata. So this was successful in that there was over 50 different field geologists from multiple institutions. They were able to collect on their tablets or smartphones and pool all that to a central map location. But there were issues with trying to prioritize data. It's kind of overwhelming in the field to sort through what information has been collected and what has not yet. So there were some advantages and disadvantages to that, and this is just an example showing the more metadata approach to this particular software. And then I'd argue if there's one good thing that comes out of 2020, probably the only good thing, it's LiDAR. We're now seeing LiDAR on phones and tablets, which I think is a really exciting opportunity to offer real-time photorealistic 3D mapping at real-life one-to-one scale. So I think there's going to be a lot of, we're going to see a lot of development in this front, and whoever's able to push this into a nice GIS workflow, I think is going to really benefit from that. And so I probably am close to time, and so I'll leave this up just for a moment, kind of highlighting some of the teaching and research applications of digital GIS mapping. I have a website, geopad.ucr.edu, that I'd encourage you to visit if you're interested in more information, or you can email me or drop questions in the chat. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Nicholas. That was, I have some questions to ask you. That was really, really good. Thank you for bringing us up to date on some of the new tools that you're using. Wanted to introduce our next speaker. It's Professor Ahmed Eldawi from UC Riverside. And he was going to be sharing stories about the UCR Spatio-Temporal Active Repository. Ahmed, turn it to you.
Hello, my name is Ahmed Eldawi. I am an assistant professor at the Computer Science Department at UC Riverside. Today, I'm presenting UCR-Star, the UCR Spatio-Temporal Active Repository. UCR-Star is a public repository of GIS data that is designed to help researchers in finding public data. Let me start with a simple question. What is the key to a successful GIS project or any data science project? Well, it's not the software or the tools you use, it's the data and how suitable it is for your project. But how to choose good geospatial data? There are several characteristics that you need to explore. First, there is the data coverage. Does it cover your home city, the state of California, the US, or the entire world? Second is the resolution. Does the data have to be of high resolution, or can your project work with a smaller but lower resolution data set? Third is the accuracy of the data. Can you tolerate noise in the data, or does it have to be highly curated? The list goes on and on with other characteristics such as data size, file format, and so on. So how do existing geospatial repositories help you with the process of choosing a data set? If you look at data.gov, the home of the federal government data, it gives you a list of data sets with textual description, even if you limit the search to geospatial data only. This does not help you much with the selection process. The same limitation applies to many other repositories, even the ones that are designed specifically for geospatial data, such as the Big Ten Academic Alliance GeoPortal, Riverside County and LA County GIS portals, and many others. To fill in this gap, we present UCR-Star, the Spatio-Temporal Active Repository. Rather than a plain old textual list of datasets, UCR-Star uses an interactive interface where you can explore the data right in your web browser. As you can see on the left, there is a list of datasets that you can browse. You can also search by keywords or other attributes. Once you select a dataset, the details and the visualization immediately pop up where you can see further information about the dataset. You can also explore it on a map where you can see the coverage, resolution, accuracy, and other characteristics for yourself. To start using UCR-Star, go to your web browser and type ucrstar.com. You will immediately see the list of datasets and the map visualization. Once you select a dataset, the visualization immediately appears on the map. You can zoom in and pan, or you can zoom out to see the entire dataset. You can also see the details of the selected dataset, such as the additional attributes available in these datasets or the size. Once you are ready to download the data, click the download link and you'll see your download options. The green link at the top will take you to the original source of the data for download. In addition, UCR-Star provides other download options. If you choose the visible area tab, you can download only the part of the data that you currently see on the screen. Furthermore, UCR-Star can convert the data to one of these popular standard formats to match your needs. Finally, you can also choose to download the entire dataset in one of these standard formats. For researchers interested in reproducibility of results, UCR-Star provides a unique digital object identifier, DOI, and a citation for the data you download so that you can include it in your paper and share it with your team. UCR-Star provides additional options such as advanced search, which allows you to search by data size or geometry type. You can also change the base map to satellite imagery to get a better sense of the data resolution and accuracy. In addition, you can bookmark or share any dataset or view, which takes you back to the same dataset and location that you currently see. To illustrate that, I'll copy this permalink and paste it in a new window. The new window will start immediately at the same scene that I was just showing. UCR-Star is made to serve the public community. So if you have a dataset that you would like to add to UCR-Star, you can fill in this form, which will send a request to our team to add the new dataset to the repository. Before ending, I would like to thank the students who worked hard to make UCR-Star available. And I would like also to acknowledge NSF and USDA for their support. Thanks for listening. Please visit UCR-Star and follow us on social media to get the recent updates about the new features and datasets. Now I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. We're going to hold questions until later, but just one quick one. Is UCR-Star database open source?
Yes, it's public and it's open source, so you can download any of these datasets. And
All right,
them are already publicly available, and the source code behind it is also open, so everything is public.
Awesome. We're going to put a link to it, and I'm sure some people will be visiting it today, but we'll come back for some questions at the end of the sessions. Thank you. Now we're going to switch to up north with Max Andrew Gardner at UC Berkeley. He's going to be discussing gaps in the grid, the promises, pitfalls, and resurgence of discrete global grids in modern geospatial analysis. Max, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Can everybody see my screen, my slides?
Yeah, I can see them.
Great. Okay. I'm going to just get started here. Title of this talk is Gaps in the Grid, the Promises, Pitfalls, and Resurgence of Discrete Global Grids in Modern Geospatial Analysis. If you allow me to sort of toot my own horn a bit, the idea for this talk began with what I think is one of the prettiest maps I've ever made. So for a little bit of background, the main tool that I use in my research is transportation and land use microsimulation. And most of the geographic data that we work with is organized into what are called transportation analysis zones, or TAZs. Here's a map from Austin, Texas, of all of Austin's TAZs. Zooming in a bit, we see that TAZs are really nice to work with for us because they are drawn such that they contain approximately equal levels of travel demand, both as origins and destinations. And also they're great because they align exactly with census block geometries, which makes it quite easy to work with demographic data, which obviously is important if we want to really study anything of interest as it relates to transportation. So how did I get from here to here? The short answer is Uber. And that joke would have worked better if I actually had to leave my house to give the talk this morning. But the real reason why this is Uber's fault is because Uber is almost single-handedly responsible for bringing back into vogue a geospatial analysis paradigm called discrete global grids, or DGGs. And they've done so vis-a-vis its wildly popular H3 platform. In the longer version of this talk, I go into greater detail about the history of DGGs and what they do well and what they don't. But for the purposes of this talk, suffice it to say that they do a lot of different things very well. But why they're so popular, in my opinion, is because for fast spatial indexing, and then for most of the time, it's because they allow the user to ignore map projections, more or less, and also because they provide arbitrary equal area units for spatial statistics and visualizations. But why hexagons? So hexagons are the design choice that Uber's made for their discrete global grid. That's the H in H3. Not all discrete global grids employ hexagons, but there's a number of reasons why the H3 library uses them, detailed here. Okay, so the slightly longer answer is that I got here because of Uber and their hexagons, and hopefully the resolution of this broadcast is good enough that you can see the hexagons on this second map here. But wait, these hexagons are all different sizes. They're not the nice, neat grid that we've been seeing from Uber's promotional material, and what's up with all these gaps between the hexagons. So the short answer here is that H3 is a hexagonal hierarchical discrete global grid, and hierarchical grids are great for a lot of things, but when you use hexagons, it results in what's called an unaligned grid, where the boundaries of different resolution aerial units are not aligned. Now, of course, this isn't an issue if you only need to use a single resolution grid. But in my case, our enterprising travel modeler thought that they could recreate TAZ geometries by taking advantage of this hierarchical nature of Uber's H3. Because again, we need zones that are sized according to the travel demand that originates and terminates in each zone. So here we have the TAZs, and here we have our hexagonal approximation. And unfortunately, this design choice forced me to make all sorts of arbitrary decisions about how to assign points and even polygon data to these hexagons. And of course, I had to do that because all of our demographic data is collected and reported at the level of these administrative boundaries. So thus begins my short diatribe, which is my actual secret agenda for giving this talk. Discrete global grids like H3 are good for solving a lot of problems, but there already exist a ton of really good domain-specific solutions. For example, traffic analysis zones. So just because, moral of the story here is just because a tool is popular, oops, little typo there, just because a tool is popular doesn't mean you have to use it. And so I'll leave it there just with a few extra maps here that I thought were pretty cool looking. Oh, and if it's not clear, yeah, basically what I've done here is I've had to assign an algorithm I came up with for assigning every census block geometry to one of these hierarchical hexagons. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. I love that you're sharing a tool, but also talking about how there some of the pros and cons of choosing a tool. Thank you. I'm particularly interested in story maps because I've been doing some volunteer work with city planning, and I'm seeing them used by the LA City quite a bit. I'd like to introduce Kian Tyler Carson and Anusha Goyal from UCLA. They're going to be talking, the title of their talk is Bamberg, Using the New ArcGIS Story Maps. Kian and Anusha, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, just quickly present this. Yeah.
Thank you all for coming to this talk today, of course. My name is Keem Carson. I'm a third-year economics student at UCLA, and I'm also pursuing a minor in both geospatial information geography.
Yeah, and I'm Anusha Goyal. I'm a fourth-year geography and international development studies major, with also a minor in geospatial information technologies. Yeah.
Both of us work as cartographic materials assistants at Young Research Library at UCLA. All right, now for the project. This project is the Bamberg Settler Story Map was created by our supervisor, Maria Jankowska, and some of her previous students. She's responsible for all the wonderful content and images that are in this map, and she worked very hard to make this quality product. Our role in creating this was actually transferring it to the newer version of Esri's story maps that came out a little over a year ago. During that transition, there were some struggles. Some of the things didn't transfer over correctly, and so we had to correct several of the dynamic maps that are present in it, and so that's a lot what we'll talk about.
Yeah, really quickly, the link at the bottom of the presentation does link to the actual story map, and it'll be at the end of the presentation too, if anyone would like to look at it. So for historical context, the video is gonna go through the story map, but whilst I'll give you a little bit of a historical context of the story map. So in the 17th and early 18th century, development in Greater Poland was actually curbed by the Swedish invasion and the Greater Northern War. And Poznan itself suffered many losses in population and infrastructure, but also because of several cholera epidemics, they lost a lot in terms of the economy as well. So because Poznan and surrounding areas were impacted so greatly by this, they thought that they should incentivize Catholic settlers from Upper Franconia to migrate to Poznan and actually occupy the free land. And they did this through offering free land and supplies and tax incentives. And so Bamberg migrants did settle in the farmland around Poznan, and it happened in 4 stages. And this story map allowed us to illustrate that quite well.
All right, we used several geospatial technologies in creating this story map, one of which was the sliding bars. Sliding bars allows you to take a map, say a raster image, and you overlay it over a base map, and then you're able to move it back and forth, and essentially you can see, oh, this is what this area looked like before, this is what it looks like now. Now, an important part of creating that also requires you to use georeferencing, which essentially you take a static raster image and you plot different points that you know exactly where they belong on a map, web map that has coordinates, and then you're able to attach that map to the base map so you can see exactly its correct position. And then we also used digitizing, which is essentially taking maybe some like parts of a raster image and creating vector features out of them so that they're easier to store, easier to view, and also can contain attributes.
Yes, so the first thing we talked about was sliding bars, which look like this. And in the story map, they're actually kind of amazing to look at, especially because it creates this intersection between geography and history. And with a historical migration pattern, being able to see the development and how it's occurred is very interesting. And it was really useful for us to create this in showing the migration patterns and how they've impacted Poznan and the area around them from not just when the migration happened, but from when it was happening to now and today's area.
Okay, so the second tool we used was georeferencing. And georeferencing is a very important part of the project. We in particular had some struggles with it, but the beauty of georeferencing is the ability to take essentially just an image, but typically a map, and to be able to trace it to a web map. It's a very simple process. You just have to take certain points that connect directly. Like if you see an intersection that you know is a specific intersection, you can plot that point on the map to that point on the base map. And doing that several times, you can create an old map like this that you see here that's several hundred years old, and you can overlay it over the current city. So we're able to see, okay, this map is several hundred years old of Poznan, and this is exactly where it is right now.
And then one of the final tools to talk about is actually one of my favorites, is being able to use a map and digitize it. So it's a static map in the background that actually had a key and everything by itself, but we were able to digitize it and create this interactive map where you can see the development of Poznan take place. And you can see it before the migration, after the migration, and way past the migration. And it's incredibly useful, again, as we've mentioned multiple times, to show a very easy, visual, digestible version of explaining Poznan's development and how the migration took a big part in it, and geographically exactly where that took place. So we'll just go over the lessons we learned.
So yeah, we learned a lot of lessons from this project. One of them had to do with georeferencing. When we first started this project, we'd only done georeferencing in QGIS, and that's what we were familiar with. Unfortunately, QGIS is not always the most compatible with ArcGIS. And so we really struggled to be able to upload that to an ArcGIS story map, but we ended up it's really not that hard to learn it in another software. And so this product really taught us that you shouldn't just try to do what you're comfortable with, but keep on working on learning new tasks as well.
And another thing that we found out was applying our knowledge and finding help was an important aspect of us trying to adapt to the new story maps. Firstly, because when we moved to the new story maps, it was incredibly basic, and we revisited it recently and it's much more developed now. But one of the things we had to do was embed the map in our UCLA library website. And that took some Googling for me, and Googling how to use HTML and embed that map. And in general, we ended up using Google, Esri, and our resources a lot. And that's something that I found with GIS. And in general, working with data is incredibly important to understand. And it's completely okay to need help and to look it up. I've Googled many things in my life. And honestly, using your resources around you is an incredible thing to remember when you're doing GIS, because it is a lot of trial and error. And that's what we wanted to share with you about our project. Thank you for listening. And if you want to visit the story map and read through the incredible history of Poznan, there's a link right there.
Thank you. I often solve problems through Googling them as well. But before we chat more about the transition between different versions of story maps, we have one more lightning talk, and I'd like to welcome again Kean Tyler Carson from UCLA, who's gonna round out this lightning talk session on a topic: creating a virtual spatial map room.
Hello again, everyone. So this project's a little different than the last one. It was also suggested by my supervisor, Maria Jankowska, and it is to serve primarily as a solution to allowing patrons of libraries in general that want to visit map collections but cannot because of coronavirus. So coronavirus was actually my main motivation for this. This is certainly unprecedented times. A year ago, I don't think very many people could have imagined that the world that we live in now was possible, but it does seem pretty clear that a more virtual world has arrived. And much like the GIS technology I used to create this virtual map room, the idea of the map room itself needs to evolve with the times. Considering the rise of GIS, virtual cartography, and web mapping, especially in recent years, it appears that we're reaching an end of the age of paper maps. In a matter of seconds, any map can be scanned and uploaded quickly into a database and placed on a library catalog. However, it seems strange to put together spatial resources and text resources in a library catalog. Instead, we should be focusing on categorizing spatial materials in their native form, that is spatially. So some features of this project uses Schedule G from the Library of Congress call number classification. And that essentially it breaks it down by continent all the way down to, in some of its subsequent tables, you can actually see individual counties and cities. And this is really handy because it allows us to see multiple layers of the map. So if you look at the bottom left corner of the map here, you can see like the individual states of Brazil, but then you can also see other countries within South America and Latin America. Another important feature is that like you can click on a country and you can immediately see pop-up boxes. So it's very easy to find a specific region's call number. So I used several GIS skills in creating this. There was lots of merging and dissolving of layers that was important in creating the final product. For example, right here, you can see this is an example of a dissolve, which I had to do to take, because I created the countries layer first, essentially, and then I wanted to create a continent layer for this map. And so I had to dissolve all the countries based on like the common attribute being the continent. And so I was able to create the continent layer very easy doing this. Also, I did a lot of attribute table editing because this wasn't a data set that existed before. I had to create it myself. And so it was like several hundred columns of countries and lots of very good information in there, of course. I did face some challenges when making this. Of course, the first problem was that the layer I used, which I believe was from Esri, did not include some countries in disputed areas, such as Western Sahara and Kosovo. And in order to fix this, I had to delete the countries that were like, so like, for example, Morocco and Western Sahara have a border dispute. So in order to resolve that, I had to remove the country of Morocco and essentially add in different shapefiles of both Morocco and Western Sahara, which led to another problem when I created layers such as the continent layer, because they didn't perfectly match up with the other shapefiles. So I ended up with extra vertices like all over the map of Western Africa, and I had to go through and remove those. Just real quickly, I want to share my map with you all so you can see it. This is the map. This I have right here, you can see all of the state layer and the country layer. And I'm just going to go through layer by layer. So you can see here the continents. Like if you wanted a map of the entirety of Asia, you can just click on the continent of Asia and it tells you you need to look at these call numbers. Same for world regions. This gives you like a slightly more specific, like if you want to look at Scandinavia, you can just click on Scandinavia. Southeast Asia, you can do it for any region. And then I think countries is probably the most useful layer because you can break it down by country, which is very common to find maps, like find a map of Italy or a map of Spain. It's very common like to look for a map of an entire country. And then lastly, I have states, which is a work in progress still because I've only added the ones from Schedule G in Library of Congress. And there's also like 3,000 pages of tables that include the rest of the countries as well as further subdivisions of countries. So that's why only these ones are done. And you'll see states is in quotation marks because not all these are states. Obviously in Canada, they're called provinces. And here in the United Kingdom, we actually use the countries that make up the United Kingdom. Just for simplicity, it's best to break it down this way, even though they're technically not states. Yeah, but here's kind of the final version. This is with all the layers on it. And this was a challenge to create because I had 4 different layers and I had to make the layers fit well with each other, like the symbology, the colors, so that it didn't look like an ugly brown mess. And I think I did a relatively good job of getting all the colors to line up pretty well. But it's really cool. Like you can click on, say, Washington, and you can see, okay, well, this is where I go. If I want a map of Washington, if I want to look at what continent it's on, okay, it's North America, the subregions North America, and like you can see the whole United States as well. So a very handy tool in finding call numbers for whatever map you're looking for in the world. And yeah, that does it for me. Thank you very much for tuning in.
Thank you. Are you in the UK right now?
No.
Oh, okay. I thought it's hard to tell where people are at these days. So, but we had some questions and I wanted to jump right to them right now. The first one was for Catherine, who talked about wildfires. It's from Ahmed from UC Riverside. He was asking, does the type of the fire, forest fire versus a brush fire, affect the type of particles and their spread?
Hello, thank you for your question. So the short answer would be yes. And the way Bluesky Smoke Modeling Framework puts that into consideration is when you enter the latitude and the longitude, it gives you a list of common field types in that area. So it'll give you maybe 4 or 5 field types, and you can even click on them and it will tell you how common they are and like how many tons per acre of that certain field type there is. And I've also done a sensitivity analysis just clicking between common field types. And I've noticed that the different amounts of air pollution varies dramatically from whether or not it's like a shrub or it's a fire or a forest fire, excuse me.
And I wanted to know, is the Bluesky framework difficult to learn? Or did you find it difficult?
It was actually really simple. So before I started using Bluesky, I actually had 0 QGIS or any kind of mapping experience. So it's been really user-friendly, and you don't need to download anything. It's completely web-based, and you really don't need any like detailed fire information other than the amount of acres that's estimated and the latitude, longitude, and whether or not it's a prescribed burn or a wildfire. And it will give you every other like estimation as far as air pollution goes. And then you can run HiSplit afterwards. That's directly on their website, and it will give you a generated smoke plume. So one of the limitations in our research is from our wonderful collaborators at UC Merced. They actually gave us PM 2.5 estimates of each day of 2018 wildfires. And the Bluesky modeling framework does not allow you to input your own estimates. You have to use their estimates, which they get from HiSplit. So that was one limitation we ran into doing our research.
Interesting. I'm gonna check it out. I'd be curious if Max checks it out and has some pros and cons for that tool coming up as well. I wanted to, excuse me, share a question for Nicholas Barth from Philip Bowen. They were asking, have you run into issues with using iPads in the field for teaching purposes? For example, battery life or overheating? And if so, how have you handled these hiccups? And are students encouraged to have a hard copy of the map in case a digital issue arises?
Yeah, good question. So once students are kind of properly trained in kind of the right etiquette, we tend to have very few problems. And so we don't have any battery issues with running all day as long as the students charged it the night before. Similarly, overheating, definitely some of the places we work, out in the summer. If the students leave the black iPad sitting out on a hot rock, it will overheat and it will stop working until it shuts, until it cools down. But as long as you put it in like a neoprene sleeve and it sits in a backpack, unless you're actively using it, there's no issues with that. So overall, not too many hiccups. There's some software glitches that are kind of mildly annoying, but they'll cause the program to crash and you'll have to reopen it, but there's no data loss, which I think is the most important thing. And yeah, for the projects that we use, the digital mapping, they don't have any hard copy. Depending on the project and where we're at, I might have an extra iPad set, but for the most part, that's what they're relying on. And then lastly, maybe just a real quick note that one thing that's really neat about having a class set is if they're all linked to the same account, it's really easy to clone them all exactly the same to start. And so students all have the same like blank slate of this is how everything is laid out, and these are the files that you need, which they can then use through the course of the course. And you're only paying for any software licenses just once, which is also nice.
Are you doing any longitudinal studies? And do you see opportunities for large scale or crowdsourcing some of these surveys as the geoscience community begins to use these tools more and more?
Yeah, there's been some efforts at looking into crowdsourcing, and I haven't delved too much into that just yet, but I know a number of geologic surveys have started setting up things where you can take a photo of a landslide or something and send it into them and say, this is where this happened, this date. And then they have populated that into online GIS systems.
Yeah, I can see emergency.
I expect there will be more of that.
Yeah, especially for emergency response. Thank you. There was a question for Ahmed. Thank you for your talk. This is from Amy Work. She's the GIS librarian at UC San Diego. She was asking, could you speak a little more to the back-end support of the UCR-Star? You mentioned all open source, but wondering if it's leveraging existing platforms or is it custom built? And also, how are you selecting the data sets to load into the UCR-Star?
Okay, thank you. For the first question, what tool we use for the backend? So the backend is custom built. We are not using any popular GIS tool, but it is using a system called Spark, which is a system for big data processing. So we had to extend Spark support GIS and visualization, and then we used it for processing data. And that's actually how we can visualize like terabytes of data and still get this immediate response for the visualization. For the second question, how we select the data sets. Currently, we it's a little bit arbitrary. So we just check if there is a popular data set that researchers use in my field, and they add it. But I also have this public form that anyone can fill in. So we get some requests on that, and then I add them. But the main thing is that it needs to be something that can be easily visualized on the map. So I try to focus on the visualization part. So if there is a GIS data set that cannot be easily visualized, then we tend not to add it, because otherwise it will not be using the the advantage of UCR-Star, which is the visualization and interactivity.
Do you think there's something that could be adapted across UC campuses?
That's one thing I'm trying to do. So I'm also reaching out to Riverside County and LA County to add their data into UCR-Star. So this is still a work in progress. And one thing I'm trying to do is doing something called UCR-Starlets. So it's like a smaller version of UCR-Star for a specific set of data. So let's say, for example, Riverside County wants to add their own data sets, but they don't want them to be mixed with all the data sets. So you can create like a smaller version of UCR-Star that only contains data sets for Riverside County. So that's something we are also working on.
It's great. Being able to work with more private data with public data sets at the same time is going to be real helpful to solve some of our urban problems, I think, and deal with some of the ethical considerations. Thank you. and sorry, the ethical considerations of privacy issues around data, which we talked about in the policy session yesterday. Okay, I'm gonna try to get a, let me see, it's 11:50. We've got a little more time. I wanted to raise a question from Alec Dara Abrams, and this was to Anusha and Kian. He said, or they said, I noticed that your temporal presentations of Poznan ended at 1939 and was curious what happened after that.
Right, so the reason we, oh, I think someone wants to answer the question.
No, go ahead. Sorry, I was just
okay.
marking it as being answered.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so the reason we did the 300 years that we did was because that was the important transition of the Bamberg settlement actually happening in Poznan. And as of from then, Poznan's borders were actually changed and it became just part of Poland. And like, this was during like World War I, World War II. And so that's, well, World War II, but that's kind of when most of like the state or like states as we know them came to be, and they didn't end up staying as like a local government administration.
In addition to that, our supervisor Maria says to have a look at slide 12. There's part of the presentation that does go past 1939. But yes, that's a very good question.
I'm gonna keep you, Kian, for a second. I've got 3 rapid fire questions for you. You know, when creating maps, how do you generally deal with identifying and navigating politics around disputed zones? Was from Daniel Henriksen. Michael C. was asking, how do you resolve the boundary overlaps and gaps between data layers, both technically and politically? And one more is kind of, you know, how are you addressing the issue of different types of devices being used to access your maps, like phones or tablets when people are out in the stacks? From Alec Dara Abrams.
Okay, thank you for all those questions. In response to Daniel's question, I would say that is consistently the most difficult thing when dealing with country level data in GIS, is the fact that there are a lot of disputed zones across the world. I mentioned a few like Kosovo and Western Sahara, but there's also all sorts of places around China and South Asia that have border disputes. In general, it's more of like trying to not make a political statement with what I do. So for this project, what I did is I just followed the Library of Congress call numbers, which had all those call numbers, which were created a very long time ago, actually had those countries had their own call numbers, or disputed areas had their own call numbers. So I would say I just in general tended to be inclusive. If I thought there was an area that was even considered separate or partially considered separate, I just counted it as separate. I oftentimes would put like an affiliated country, like I included Hong Kong as separate, but I put in the affiliated country section, I put China. And that's common, that's kind of normal throughout this project, because in the country layer, you'll, if you take a look at it, you'll see that like areas like, I think the like the Azores are listed separately, but they're identified with Portugal, and that's obviously just a part of Portugal. So that's kind of how I did it for this project, but in general, I take it project by project. The question from Michael is very similar. So I would say it's difficult to deal with overlapping. I found that it wasn't like the data sets I had lined up pretty well. There were a few issues, which is why I had problems when I was dissolving the layers, but it's, especially this scale, it's not super noticeable. So spatially, it wasn't that much of a problem. For the third question, that is something that I definitely need to work on, is figuring out how to adapt this so it's viewable on phones and tablets, because especially for librarians, like having worked in a library for the past year, I know how frustrating it is to run back and forth between your computer halfway across the library a very big library where I work to the map stack, only to realize that you forgot what the call number was, and now you have to run back and find it again. So that is definitely something I should work on figuring out.
Interesting. We had a question for Max. Thank you, Kian. That was like a huge lightning round of questions. Thank you for keeping track of them and answering so well. This one was for Max, and it's from Amy Work. She was asking, how does the algorithm you've developed handle census blocks that slit the hexagon boundaries? That's always a fun issue.
So, excuse me, I'm assuming that you're talking about when they split. Yeah, exactly, split.
Sorry, split.
So there's a few different ways you can handle it in the version that is in my background here. What I've done is just pointing doesn't seem to work. What I've done is just assign each block to the hexagon that contains a plurality of the surface area of that block. So that's why you see these, that's why we get these cool shapes that are kind of like leaching into other hexagons. That happens when the majority of their area or the plurality of their area is in a different hexagon, but they have these little fingers sticking out elsewhere. But there's lots of other ways. I mean, the other way to do it is you can completely dissolve the census block geometries and weight their attributes according to their area. For household income, for example, you would combine, you can actually split, I guess, a census block that crosses a hexagonal boundary, and based on the percentage of the area that's in one geometry and the percentage of the area that's in the other hexagon, you would allocate its attributes proportionally. But that's not, you don't get the cool maps doing it that way. Thanks for the question.
Did any of the participants want to say some final words or respond to some of the other questions posed to one participant, but maybe you had some thoughts on as well? I wanted to, give a shout out to Michael Peters from the UCLA and the LA County Fire Department, who I found encouraged me to check out Bluesky modeling and saying it's not such a challenge to learn the new tools. So I'm going to give that a shot. I wanted to thank our panelists today and give them a huge round of applause. Lightning talks are so great because we just get a flavor of the work that you're doing, and distilling it to 5 minutes is a challenge, but really gives us a broad overview of the kind of work that people are doing across the University of California.
One thing I did want to mention, I'm moving to LA at the end of the month, so I'm going to be looking for new geo friends down there. So reach out to me on Twitter or email. They're in the slides. Maybe looking forward to getting to know some of you in SoCal.
Right on. Why are you coming to Los Angeles?
My wife actually is starting a grad program at UCLA.
Right on. Yeah, look forward to meeting you. I'm part of Map Time LA, and I'm doing some meetups in the LA area. And there's a great community here, but I'm also want to come visit up to other campuses and meet some other GIS folks as well. This remote environment is kind of interesting as well. I think it's just been really a great experience to be able to hear and learn from people from all across the state of California. We're all in the same time zone, so I think we may be able to do some more work like this in 2021. that'll draw this session to a close. We do have a lunchtime, kind of mappy lunchtime to talk about environment and sustainability. There's a couple other topics as well. And then we're going to meet in the afternoon on the built environment. But please feel free to continue the conversation in Slack, DM me, reach out on social media to any of our speakers, and have a good lunchtime. Thank you all.
Thank you.